So recently I was asked the question, why has the United Kingdom supported Ukraine so strongly, with an almost unnatural zeal, during a significant economic downturn, brought on by the COVID pandemic and a poorly executed Brexit? Not only have they been supporting a government with a questionable past, but they have been making a massive enemy out of one of the most influential countries in the world. Just to put this support into perspective, in total, the UK provided £2.4 billion of military aid to Ukraine in 2022, which was more than any other nation except the United States, and the government has committed to sustain the same level of funding in 2023. So why have they gotten involved? Well, I choose to believe that they are doing it because it is the right thing to do. As a bastion of democracy and a former superpower, they are hell-bent on fighting tyranny and helping a sovereign nation protect itself against unprovoked aggression. However, there is another possibility, and whilst highly negative, it does bear some serious consideration. You see, it's easier for the UK to get someone else to fight this war whilst diminishing a future potential enemy. Now I realize that all the pro-Russian bots will immediately scream, proxy war, and to some extent this idea would corroborate that belief. But this concept is predicated on the fact it wouldn't have happened if Russia hadn't invaded. The raw aggression and the perceived future threat of Russia has forced the UK to act, but their lack of defense force has led them to have to act far away from the borders of the country. Why were they forced to do this? Well, the only reason is that the UK cannot defend itself. The armed forces have been left in such a sorry state, they are arguably no longer fit for purpose. The International Institute for Strategic Studies' annual report of international defense claimed that the UK has cut defense spending by 8% in real terms, causing an estimated 20 to 30% reduction in military combat capabilities. Whilst this decline has been happening, the Russians have been increasing their spending to the point that it is now an eye-watering 33% of GDP. But before all those highly patriotic people get excited, I am referring specifically to the machinery, equipment, and political will, not the men and women manning it, although we could do with significantly more of them. These soldiers are highly effective, professional people who are prepared to fight to the death to protect this country, and I commend them one and all, including our veterans who have given so much. So let this post not be considered a slight on their mighty efforts, but rather a snapshot of their once proud defense force now left, hollowed out and impotent. Thus far, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has shown zero intent to halt the cuts to member numbers. There was no review of defense spending, no reform of military procurement, and no change to the real cut in day-to-day MOD spending. Not to mention, whilst other services are being cut, there is a massive cost of living crisis and his political party is under threat. It would be very unpopular to be seen to increase defense spending. Sending goods to Ukraine is a cheaper option and makes the government look good without all the hassle. Interestingly, the money required to improve the defense situation is small when compared to the other crises affecting the country, like national health and the significant debt repayments. What this means is that it's more of a political choice than a real lack of funds that is leaving our armed forces in the doldrums. Let's get into it. Recently, a senior US general privately told the UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace that the British Army is no longer regarded as a top-level fighting force. This was a major slap in the face to the once proud country and from its top ally no less. But it's not the first time that the British Armed Forces have been dismissed. In 2021, Mike Mullen, a former chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, warned that cuts in the size of the British Army was a huge concern to him and that as an ally the UK was getting very close to not being able to contribute. This decline in warfighting capability, following decades of cuts to save money, needed to be reversed faster than planned in the wake of Russia's war in Ukraine, because what happens if Ukraine fails in its efforts to repel Russia? The next step is NATO, and that brings the UK into a hot war. So, let's discuss what has happened. First, I want to focus on force strength. The strength of the UK armed forces dropped by 3.3% between October 1, 2021 and October 1, 2022, according to the latest recruitment and retention figures released by the UK government, with just 5,090 people joining the regular forces, a 29.8% decrease registered during the reporting period. The UK government revealed that the total strength of UK forces personnel stood at 192,300 as of October 1, 2022. This marked a 6,640 decrease in service personnel compared to the same point last year. I think it's important to point out that approximately 34,000 members are volunteer reserve. Retention is also suffering, with 16,250 people leaving the UK regular forces between October 1, 2021 and September 30, 2022, or more than 1,300 per month, an increase of 17.4% compared with the previous 12-month period. This has been driven by extremely poor pay, which has long been an issue of contention, having been affected by historical public sector pay freezes, and a steep rise in UK living costs because of rocketing inflation. In 2021-22, only those on rates below £24,000 received a pay rise of £250, with all other pay increment levels remaining frozen in 2020-21 rates of pay. According to official figures, compiled by the Office for National Statistics, in 2021-22, the growth of military salaries was lower than the real growth of average earnings. Relative to the Consumer Price Index, military salaries were down 3.7% during 2021-22, whereas growth in UK average earnings for the economy experienced a growth rate of 2.6%. This was all pre the massive increase in inflation, which saw the real terms paid dropping dramatically. You can expect the retention issue to understandably get worse as force members look for better paying work in order to survive and take care of their families. To put this into context, at just 76,000 strong, the British Army is less than half the size it was back in 1990 and the smallest it has been since Napoleonic times. The force is due to shrink even further to 73,000 under current plans that will be implemented unless new money is found. Please remember this number of 76,000 is total army strength and not just fighting men. In contrast, at the start of the war and excluding its mobilization, the Russian army had 150,000 fighting men and will be increasing its army to 1.15 million with a second mobilization. Due to all of this, it would take 5 to 10 years for the army to be able to field a warfighting division of some 25,000 to 30,000 troops, and approximately 30% of UK forces on high readiness are reservists who are unable to mobilize within NATO timelines, resulting in the army arriving to a situation under strength. But to its credit, the professionalism of those still in the armed forces largely make up for the lack of numbers and pure ability, but this unsustainable in the long term. But it's not just the army, all the forces have struggled with numbers to ensure combat readiness. This downward spiral can only be curtailed through investment, better salaries, more opportunities for advancement and progression, and more importantly the facilities and equipment to feel cared for and appreciated. Next is machinery. The Royal Air Force has suffered significant reductions, with it now having the smallest combat fleet in history, having lost more than half its aircraft in the last 14 years. With the retirement of the last Tornadoes, including 24 first-generation Typhoon fighters, the RAF fighter fleet has been whittled down to an estimated 119 units from almost 850 in 1989. This is down 43% from 210 in 2007. The RAF has pledged to purchase 138 F-35B fighters, but the first batch of 48 will only be concluded in 2024, and even then, the high drop-off in pilot training and training hours has left most wondering how many of these planes will even be operational and not just sitting in mothballs. Interestingly, to reduce costs, the Air Force is already renting their refueling fleet, rather than owning it, and will do a similar deal when it comes to the replacement for their Hawk trainers. The next big question on the horizon is whether the UK will stick to its F-35 pledge. These are expensive to purchase and expensive to maintain fighters with a questionable performance history, and having already sunk £2 billion into the Tempest program, what appetite will the politicians have to see the F-35 fleet expanded? I am highly doubtful. But the decreases are not just fighter-related, with logistics and helicopter fleets taking a pounding, with the RAF due to lose its entire fleet of C-130 Hercules aircraft in 2023. The plans to purchase more of 400M Atlas planes were rejected due to costs. Another silly situation and a complete lack of flexibility revolves around Challenger 2, aka Chally. With a fleet of 227 units in 9 months before the Russian invasion, it was announced that 79 tanks would be scrapped, and 148 units upgraded to Challenger 3 status. Despite the growing problems in Ukraine, the UK has steadfastly refused to change course and has instead opted to send only 14 of these to Ukraine. Well, if you are intent on scrapping 79, why not send them all to Ukraine, 50 for fighting and the rest for parts? That's a number that would make a massive difference to the war effort. If I was to give them the benefit of the doubt, it's highly questionable what percentage of the 79 is operational. With all the cost cutting, these have probably already been scavenged for spares amongst other things. But despite all of this, it marks a further reduction in the combat abilities of the Royal Tank Corps at a time when the ability to wield effective tanks is clear to all. Now I have no doubt that Challenger 3, if fitted with APS, would become significantly more effective, but we have seen that no matter how good your tanks are, numbers are important. The Russians, in contrast, have their manufacturing facilities on a war footing, with T-90s being produced at a rapid clip. Yes, a lot of their arsenal is old, but what it lacks in quality, it makes up for in numbers, and they have access to thousands of tanks, far quicker than we could hope to modify or produce additional Challys. Then you have the FV-432, the UK Army's answer to the Armoured Personnel Carrier. This unit joined the service in 1962 and frankly should have been phased out ages ago, as was intended by the arrival of the Warrior in 1988, but a change in the operational role of that vehicle meant the retainment of the FV. This unit, in typical British fashion, has only seen upgrades, the latest one being the Bulldog or FV-430 Mark III, which had a new diesel engine and braking system fitted. For operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, this unit had a Rafael ERA package, air conditioning and IED jammers installed. The FV-432 is very similar in appearance to the American M113, but would lose out in trials against the M113 for the Australian Army, who considered the British offering inferior. But given the changing battlefields and a reliance on mines and IEDs, the design of the FV-432 is obsolete and has been for some time. What's more, there appears to be no plan or appetite to replace these vehicles. Recently, the chair of the UK Defence Committee warned that we have given so much to Ukraine, we risk running out of ammunition within 2 weeks if forced to fight. This was admittedly based on the expenditure of ammunition currently being felt by Ukraine, but still the point is stark and worrying. By 2026, the Royal Navy will have just 10 frigates, that's down from 13 today as aging Type 23 vessels decommission. The 10 frigates, plus the 6 Type 45 destroyers that should still be in service at the time, could struggle to meet the United Kingdom's naval needs. There will be aircraft carriers and amphibious ships to escort, fisheries and shipping lanes to patrol, vessels of rival fleets to shepherd near UK waters and the Falkland Islands to protect. A force of 16 warships is unable to do all of that. Especially considering that, at any given time, just a third of the vessels will be available for operations. The others will be in maintenance or refit or working up for deployments. For example, a single carrier battle group, built around one of 2 new Queen Elizabeth-class flat tops, would require a destroyer and 3 frigates. That might leave 1 frigate for other tasks or to replace any ships that suffer damage or sink in combat. But it's not just the fighting vehicles. Most ominously, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary has just 1 dry storage ship with rigs that are compatible with the 2 new flat tops. In terms of submarines, there are only 10, of which 4 are ballistic nuclear submarines. Once again, not nearly enough for an island as important as the United Kingdom. Now, I am not saying that the Russian fleet is any way the best it could be, but you just get the feeling that they could make up the losses, and it only really takes one really committed submarine crew or flight of bombers using standoff missiles to make life very difficult for the Royal Navy. Russia currently has 74 submarines in service and 206 warships. That's about 7 times as many subs and well over 3 times as many total vessels in service. In conclusion, no matter how you consider the situation, it suits us for the war between Russia and Ukraine to stay where it is, because if it doesn't and things start to slip out of control, the United Kingdom will not be able to commit nearly enough resources to help properly. So, for now, propping up the Ukrainian government and the continuous supply of arms and material seems to be the best plan available, because God help us if we need to go and fight Russia, or anyone larger than Andorra for that matter. Thanks for watching.